Some wounds don't bleed. They sit under your skin like frost, turning everything cold. I'm 67 years old. My name is Lynette, and if you'd asked me a year ago what I wanted most in life, I'd have said a peaceful old age surrounded by family. I never thought I'd be writing the story of how my own daughter made me feel smaller than I thought possible on a day meant to honor mothers. I raised Gabrielle alone after her father left. She was 13, moody, and had a knack for turning tears into weapons, but I loved her fiercely. I scrubbed floors, worked double shifts at a diner, and studied for a medical secretary's certificate at night so I could give her more than I'd ever had. Every birthday cake she blew candles over, every pair of school shoes she wore, every field trip she went on, there was a bill I'd figured out how to pay by skipping something for myself. So when she invited me to a special Mother's Day celebration, I told myself maybe, just maybe, this was the year she'd see me not as a resource, not as the woman who could be leaned on whenever her credit card maxed out, but as Mom. She told me it would be at her mother-in-law's house. My heart sank a little. Diane, her husband Nathan's mother, was a woman who owned pearl-embroidered gardening gloves and once told me she didn't do store brands. She'd greeted me at Gabrielle's wedding with a handshake and a smile that never reached her eyes. Still, I wanted to look my best. I wore my floral tea-length dress with the tiny blue forget-me-nots, the one I'd bought years ago for a church banquet. I curled my hair, dabbed on the rose perfume my own mother used to wear, and clasped my pearl earrings. As I drove, I kept telling myself it doesn't matter where it is. It's about spending time together. Diane's house was as showy as ever, a sprawling two-story with a circular driveway, a fountain shaped like a swan, and two stone lions guarding the front steps. Through the arched doorway, I could smell roasting lamb and hear clinking glasses. Inside, everything glittered. The dining table was dressed in white linen, crystal goblets, gold-rimmed plates, and a centerpiece of orchids and roses. Each place setting had a tiny handwritten name card. Diane's was propped in front of the head chair like a crown jewel. Gabrielle was bustling about in a fitted cream dress, cheeks flushed. She kissed my cheek quickly, already distracted by Diane showing her some glossy brochure. "Sit here, Mom," she said, pulling out a chair halfway down the table. Not next to her. Not even opposite her. I noticed two gift bags at Diane's place. One large and wrapped in gold paper with a satin bow, and another much smaller one in pastel pink sitting at the edge of my plate. When everyone had settled, Gabrielle stood and made a short speech about being blessed to have two incredible mothers in her life. She turned to Diane first, taking the gold bag with a little flourish. Inside, Diane found a white gold necklace studded with diamonds and sapphires. I'd seen similar pieces in jewelry store windows, $20, 000 easily. The sparkle caught every beam from the chandelier. Diane clasped it to her throat, beaming like she'd just been crowned Miss America. Then Gabrielle handed her an envelope. And Gabrielle announced proudly, tickets for you and Dad to a 12-day Mediterranean cruise, first class. There was applause. Nathan kissed his mother's cheek. Diane pretended to dab her eyes. Then Gabrielle turned to me. She picked up the smaller bag from my place setting and passed it over. "And for you, Mom." The bag was light. I reached in and found a thin gold-colored ring topped with a pink stone that looked like plastic. A price tag was still tucked under the cushion in the box, $29.99. Beneath it was a floral greeting card with Happy Mother's Day printed in glitter. Inside, she'd scrawled, "Thanks for everything, Mom." The silence was a living thing. I could feel the eyes flicking between Diane's glittering diamonds and my pink glass feed. Someone cleared their throat. The clink of a fork on porcelain sounded too loud. I smiled as best I could, slipped the ring on it pinched, and said, "Thank you, sweetheart." No one commented. No one broke the tension. Diane leaned back, the necklace catching the light like it knew it had won something. The rest of the meal was a blur. Lamb, asparagus, some kind of saffron rice. I ate little, nodding when spoken to, pretending to listen to the cruise itinerary. My stomach churned. By dessert, I told Gabrielle I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. She kissed my cheek distractedly, still leaning over Diane's shoulder to look at photographs of the ship's ballroom. The evening air was cool, but it couldn't put out the heat in my face. As I drove home, I thought of the years behind me, the nights I'd gone without dinner so Gabrielle could have new cleats for soccer, the envelopes of cash I'd slipped into her purse when she was between jobs, the emergency car repairs I'd paid for without asking for repayment. And now, a $30 ring. I sat in my kitchen under the yellow glow of the overhead light, turning the ring over in my palm. The stone caught the light in a dull way, like it knew it was pretending to be something it wasn't. That was when it happened, the shift. Not a burst of anger, not yet. Just a hollow, heavy knowing something in our relationship had broken for good. And as I closed my hand around the ring, one thought anchored itself in my mind. If Gabrielle thought she could humiliate me like this, and I'd swallow it with a smile, she had no idea who her mother really was. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of tea untouched in front of me. The events of yesterday still pressed on me like a heavy stone on my chest. That necklace, those cruise tickets, the glinting symbols of love and gratitude that weren't for me. I could still see Gabrielle's smile as she clasped the necklace around Margaret's neck, her mother-in-law practically glowing with delight. Meanwhile, I had walked away with a mass-produced ring that probably came in a plastic bubble at the checkout counter. But what hurt most wasn't the cheapness of the gift, it was what it represented. Years, decades of giving and never being given in return. I stood abruptly, almost knocking my tea over, and walked into the small spare room where I kept old files. For most people, this was the junk room. For me, it was a history of my sacrifices. There were boxes of receipts, check stubs, loan agreements, quiet paper witnesses to my life as a mother who gave and gave, thinking it was love. One by one, I began laying out the records across the dining table. $42,000 tuition for Gabrielle's degree in communications. She had been the first in our family to go to university, and I had wanted her to have the life I never could. She'd thanked me back then, of course, with a quick hug before running off with friends, promising to make me proud. $28,000, her wedding. I'd paid for the venue, the dress, the catering. Her husband, Patrick, had insisted they could handle the honeymoon, but handling it apparently meant charging it to my credit card, just for a few days until his business deal went through, $17,500, the down payment for their first car. Gabrielle said she needed something safe and reliable. They traded it in 2 years later for an imported SUV that cost more than my house had back in the 80s. Then there were the smaller emergencies that stacked up into something enormous. A few thousand here when Patrick's business hit a temporary slump. Another $5,000 when their roof needed urgent repairs. $10,000 when they decided to open a coffee shop that never made it past the first winter. I tallied it all in the margin of a yellow legal pad. $207,800 over the past 15 years. The numbers stared back at me like a slap. I leaned back in my chair and let out a bitter laugh. Over $200,000, and not once, had Gabrielle ever called me just to say she missed me. Every phone call was about something she needed. Every visit came with a price tag, even if it wasn't spoken aloud at first. It hadn't started out that way. When Gabrielle was little, she would draw me pictures of flowers and castles, telling me I was her princess mommy. Somewhere between then and now, those pictures had turned into bills, her love into polite obligation. It hit me like a slow, dawning truth. My generosity had stopped being generosity. It had turned into quiet exploitation. And I had let it happen. The ringing of my phone broke the silence. I glanced at the screen. Patrick. I let it ring. He called again. Then Gabrielle. I ignored both. I needed space to see the full picture of my life, without the constant noise of their wants. As the hours passed, I went deeper into the boxes, unearthing receipts for things I had almost forgotten. The plane tickets for their anniversary trip to Santorini, the temporary loan that was never repaid, the business license I'd paid for when Patrick decided he was going to flip houses. By the time evening came, my dining table looked like the scene of a financial crime, only the victim had been smiling through it for years, thinking it was love. And maybe it was at first. But love shouldn't leave you feeling used and invisible. That night, as I packed the records back into their boxes, I made a quiet vow. This ledger wasn't going to keep growing. Gabrielle had shown me exactly where I stood in her life yesterday, and now I was going to start showing her where she stood in mine. The morning after my marathon with the financial records, I woke up earlier than usual. The air in the house felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but sharper, like someone had thrown open the curtains on a long-ignored window. I padded into the kitchen, poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug, and sat at the table. The pink costume ring sat on my finger like a joke, catching the early sun through the blinds. I twisted it idly, remembering yesterday's total, $207,800 in 15 years. It wasn't just the number. It was the story behind it, the fact that every one of those dollars had been given with love, but received with expectation. At 8:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Gabrielle's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Morning, Mom." Her voice was sweet and breezy, the tone she always used before asking for something. "Hey, quick favor. Patrick's got to pick up this display case for the cafe from a guy in Westfield. We need to borrow your truck this weekend. It's the only thing big enough." I looked out the window at my Chevy, sitting faithful in the driveway. I'd bought that truck for my small furniture resale business, the one thing in my life that had never let me down. Over the years, it had hauled antique wardrobes, marble-topped sideboards, and once a Victorian bed frame I'd driven 200 miles to pick up. It had also hauled Gabrielle and Patrick's endless projects, home renovations, thrift store hauls, secondhand restaurant equipment that was too good a deal to pass up. Every time, I'd handed over the keys without hesitation. Until now. "No," I said simply. A beat of silence. "Sorry, what?" I said, "No, Gabrielle. You can't borrow it." I could hear her blink on the other end. "Mom, we just need it for a couple of hours." No, my voice was steady, almost unnervingly so. "The last time Patrick borrowed it, the gas tank was empty and the tailgate latch was broken. I paid for repairs myself. I'm not doing that again." She tried the guilt tactic. "Why are you being like this? We're family." "Yes," I replied evenly, and family respects boundaries. "I need my truck this weekend for my own work. You'll have to rent something." Her breath hitched the sound of someone unused to hearing me say no. "Wow. Okay. Guess I'll figure it out." She hung up without a goodbye. I set the phone down and felt something strange rise in my chest. Not guilt, the old reflex, but something almost electric. The first no. It was such a small word that it carried the weight of every time I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. Every "sure, honey" when it meant dipping into my savings. Every "of course" when I'd been bone tired, but still showed up. I stood, walked to the window, and looked at my truck again. That Chevy was more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of independence, the one tool I'd built my little business around, the business that had paid my bills without help from anyone. And then it hit me. The truck wasn't the only thing Gabrielle had come to see as hers for the taking. The business itself was her unspoken inheritance. She'd mentioned more than once, "When you're ready to slow down, Mom, Patrick and I could take over." I'd smiled, not realizing that takeover probably meant run into the ground. I wasn't going to give her the chance. By 11 a.m., I was in the tidy office of Martin Ames, my lawyer. He'd helped me draw up my will years ago, back when I thought leaving everything to Gabrielle was the purest expression of love. Now I knew better. He stood as I entered, offering his usual warm handshake. "Twice in 1 week, Lynette. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I sat, smoothing my skirt. "I want to sell the business, Martin. All of it, inventory, truck, client list. And I want it done quickly." His brows rose. "That's a big step. May I ask what's brought this on?" I met his gaze. "Because my daughter treats it like her safety net. I'm about to cut the net." A slow smile tugged at his lips. "I see. I don't want her to know until it's done. She'll try to talk me out of it, or worse, make me feel guilty enough to stop. This has to be handled quietly." He leaned back, tapping his pen. "Understood. I can draw up the listing paperwork and vet potential buyers. Are you ready for the fact that this will change your financial relationship with her completely?" "Yes," I said firmly. "That's the point." We discussed valuation, possible buyers, and the timeline. Martin promised to start the process immediately, assuring me he could keep it discreet. When I left his office, the sun was high and hot. I slid into the driver's seat of my truck and just sat there for a moment, feeling the cool leather under my hands. It struck me that this might be one of the last times I drove it. The thought should have saddened me, but it didn't. Once Martin and I started the paperwork for the sale, it hit me. I didn't have to wait until the deal closed to start taking my life back. Selling the business was the big move, yes, but there were dozens of little lifelines Gabrielle had wrapped around it and around me for years. She didn't just rely on my money. She relied on access. On the fact that my storage unit, my accounts, my suppliers, my delivery van, and even my staff could be bent to her convenience with one phone call. I'd told myself it was helping. What it had really been was subsidizing her lifestyle without her having to admit she couldn't afford it. Well, not anymore. The first thing I tackled was the storage unit. Half of it was filled with my business inventory, chairs, lamps, small tables ready for refinishing. The other half? Cafe detritus. Stacks of mismatched chairs she'd bought at auctions, 3 patio umbrellas that hadn't been used in years, and a heavy, dust-covered espresso machine just in case the one in the cafe broke. I spent the better part of Monday morning moving all of Gabrielle's things into one neat corner, photographing each pile and writing up an inventory list. By the time I locked the door again, the key felt lighter in my hand. I sent her a short, clipped text. Your items are ready for pickup by Friday. After that date, I'll be terminating your access to the storage unit. No emojis. No love you. Just the facts. Next, I called my 2 biggest wholesale suppliers, people I'd known for decades, since they'd been running their operations out of the backs of beat-up vans. I'd worked hard to get those accounts. Gabrielle had simply inherited them by proximity, sliding her orders for cafe tableware, napkins, and decor into my monthly statements. She'd always said she'd settle up later. She never did. Hi, it's Lynette, I told the rep. Please remove all authorized buyers from my account except me. Even your daughter? The woman asked, surprised. Especially my daughter, I said. There was a pause. Then, I understand. On Wednesday, I brought my delivery driver, Vince, into the office. Vince had been with me for 8 years, the kind of man who could haul a walnut armoire up 3 flights without breaking a sweat or a smile. Vince, I said, from now on, every delivery must be scheduled through me. If Gabrielle or Patrick calls you directly, you're to tell them you're unavailable. And if they push, just say company policy has changed. He frowned. You sure, Ms. Lynette? I don't mind helping them out. I know, I said, pushing a small stack of bills toward him. But I do. Consider this a thank you for handling the awkwardness. He nodded, tucking the money into his pocket. You're the boss. And for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like one. By Friday afternoon, Gabrielle's reaction arrived. First voicemail, light and questioning. Hey, Mom. Weird thing the supplier says I'm not on your account anymore? Did something happen? Second voicemail, tighter. Patrick went to the storage unit, and they said the code's been changed. Can you call me? Third voicemail, with that edge she gets when she's not getting her way. Mom. Are you mad at me? What's going on? I didn't answer any of them. That evening, I sat in my armchair, sipping chamomile tea, feeling an odd calm. This wasn't vengeance. It was equilibrium. The following week, I made the real change one Gabrielle would feel immediately. I rewrote our customer service policy. No more last-minute, friend, jobs pushed ahead of paying clients. No more, just this one's freebies. Every order, big or small, would be invoiced. Payment in full before delivery. It wasn't personal. It was simply how every other client was treated. Gabrielle was on the client list, so she got the same email as everyone else. 2 days later, my phone lit up. What is going on? Gabrielle's voice was sharp, no attempt at charm. I just tried to get table linens for the cafe next weekend, and they said I'd have to prepay and pick them up myself. You've never made me do that before. That's the policy now, I said evenly. I'm not everyone, Mom. I'm your daughter. Yes, I agreed, and that's why you've had the benefit of my business for free for years. But those days are over. There was a long silence. I could almost hear her choosing between shouting and crying. This feels cold, she said finally. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. It feels fair. When we hung up, I knew she'd felt it, the tremor in the ground under her feet. For the first time, Gabrielle was realizing that my resources weren't hers on demand. And this was only the beginning, because one by one, I was pulling every plug she had been quietly living off of. And soon, there wouldn't be a single cord left to cling to. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the sound of footsteps or a knock. It was the smell. When I stepped in from the garden that afternoon, I caught the faint scent of Gabrielle's perfume, a sugary floral blend she's worn since her 20s. I froze in the hallway. I hadn't seen her car in the driveway, but that didn't mean much. She knew where I kept the spare key. I rounded the corner into the kitchen and stopped cold. There she was, sitting at my table like she owned the place, sleeves pushed up, my accordion file of business records splayed open in front of her. My phone sat next to her elbow. The yellow legal pad, the one I'd filled with every dollar I'd given her over the past 15 years, lay in the center of the table. She was thumbing through the papers with an odd mix of urgency and entitlement, like someone rifling through a closet for a sweater they were sure was theirs. What, I said, my voice low and steady, are you doing here? She looked up and had the audacity to smile a little. That same smile she used at age 10 when I caught her sneaking cookies before dinner. Mom, you weren't answering your phone. Patrick heard from one of your clients that you're selling the business. I just needed to understand what's going on. She gestured at the papers as if that explained everything. I called some of your accounts this morning, said I was your assistant so they'd send me the latest invoices and contracts. I blinked. You lied to my clients? Her expression didn't change. I didn't lie, you pretended to be me or my employee. That's lying, Gabrielle. She shrugged like it was a parking ticket. I had to. This is my future you're planning with. I walked over, pulled out the chair opposite hers, and sat down slowly, keeping my hands folded on the table. Your future, I said softly. Gabrielle, this is my business. My work. My truck. My suppliers. My storage. There is nowhere in this equation. Her cheeks flushed. That's not fair. You've always said this was something you'd pass down to me. I said that once, years ago. I cut in. Back when I thought you understood what it meant to run something instead of drain it dry. She jerked back like I'd slapped her. Drain it. I reached for the legal pad, turned it toward her, and tapped the column of figures. Look. She scanned the page, her eyes darting from one number to the next. 200N. Mom, this can't be right. It's rounded down, I said. My voice was even, but inside my chest, my heart was pounding like I'd just run a race. Tuition, weddings, cars, business bailouts, cafe supplies, legal fees, vacations, childcare. I've paid for all of it. Every time you called, I said yes, even when I couldn't afford it, even when it meant giving up things I needed myself. And do you know what I got in return? She shook her head, still staring at the numbers. No phone calls unless you needed something, I continued. No visits just to spend time. No, how's your knee after my surgery? No, how did the rose bush survive the frost? Just a steady stream of requests and an unspoken assumption that I'd keep saying yes. Her mouth opened. That's not. It's exactly what it is, I said, sharper now. I kept thinking if I gave enough, one day you'd see me. But all I did was make it easier for you not to. Her voice trembled. I thought you wanted to help. You're my mom. That's what moms do. Helping is one thing. Funding your entire adult life is another, I said, leaning in. And you never once asked if it was hurting me. Did you think about how humiliating it was to sit in that dining room on Mother's Day, watching you give Diane a $20,000 necklace and a cruise, while you handed me a $30 ring? Did you think about what that said to me? To everyone in that room. Her eyes filled. That's not what I meant, it's what you did. My voice cracked. You wanted to impress her, to play the perfect daughter-in-law. And I was the afterthought. She swiped at her eyes angrily. You're twisting this. Patrick's business has eaten more of my savings than my own mortgage ever did, I snapped. And you stood by and let it, because it was easier than standing on your own 2 feet. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She stared down at the legal pad, then back at me, like she didn't recognize the woman across from her. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just cutting me off?" "No," I said, pushing the papers back into their folder. "I'm finally putting us both on solid ground. You'll stand on yours, and I'll stand on mine. And for the first time in 15 years, we'll both know exactly where we stand." Her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, standing and gathering the files into my arms. "But for once, it will be my mistake." She shoved her chair back hard enough to scrape the tile and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. I stood there in the stillness, my hands trembling. A part of me wanted to run after her, to smooth things over, to undo the last 10 minutes. But then my gaze fell on the legal pad still sitting on the table, that long, undeniable list of what I'd given and what I'd lost, and I stayed exactly where I was. The first call came at 7:13 a.m. I was still in my robe, waiting for the kettle to boil, when my phone buzzed against the counter. "Gabrielle." I let it ring. It buzzed again immediately, her name glowing in the dim kitchen light. And again. By the third call, I silenced the ringer. I already knew what this was, not a conversation, but a siege. The voicemails began within minutes. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. We're family. Families don't turn their backs on each other." 20 minutes later, "You know Patrick's health isn't great right now. His blood pressure's been up, and stress like this could make it worse. Is that really what you want?" An hour later, her voice softer, like she was trying to reach the version of me she used to manipulate with ease. "Do you remember when I couldn't afford to stay in school and you stepped in? I thought that was love. I thought that meant we'd always look out for each other." Her tone shifted with each message, pleading, accusing, nostalgic, resentful. She was pulling levers at random, hoping one would work. By 10 a.m., she moved on to texts. "Patrick's doctor says stress can cause another episode. If something happens, I hope you can live with it. I guess I know where I stand now. After everything I've done for you." That one made me pause. I tried to think of what exactly she thought she'd done for me. The only example that came to mind was the occasional holiday dinner where she'd make sure there was a seat for me at the very end of the table, between a potted plant and the coat rack. Around 11 o'clock, she called 5 times in a row. I was in the backyard watering my roses, the phone vibrating on the kitchen counter inside. Every buzz felt like a test. Will you break this time? Will you run to pick it up and apologize for daring to have a boundary? I didn't. By noon, she left a message with an edge in her voice that I recognized instantly, the sound she made when she was shifting from persuasion to attack. "I don't even know who you are anymore. You sound like some cold, bitter woman. What happened to my mom?" I sat in my armchair with a mug of tea and let her words settle around me. They didn't pierce the way they might have once. That's when I realized something important. I wasn't playing the same game anymore. After lunch, she tried a new tactic, layering guilt with nostalgia. "Do you remember when we used to go to that little cafe on Saturdays? We'd share a cinnamon roll and you'd tell me I could do anything I set my mind to. You were my best friend. I miss that. I miss you." It was almost convincing. Almost. But I knew the difference between missing me and missing what I could provide. By 3 o'clock, the calls slowed to every half hour. Her voice, when she did leave messages, was thinner now, more desperate. "Patrick's lying down. He's pale. I'm scared, Mom. I need you." For a moment, my hand twitched toward the phone. That old reflex, the mother's instinct to rush in, to fix, to shield, flared painfully in my chest. But then I thought of the ledger, the $207,000 over 15 years, the pink plastic ring, the look on her face when I told her the free ride was over. This wasn't about Patrick's blood pressure. This was about pressure of a different kind, the kind meant to bend me back into my old shape. By 5 p.m., the house was quiet again. I made myself a light dinner, poured a glass of red wine, and took a long bath. The warm water loosened the tightness in my shoulders, and for the first time in days, I felt the smallest ripple of peace. I thought about what she'd said, about me turning my back, about me becoming cold. And I realized she had never seen the difference between love and servitude. To her, They had always been the same thing. But I knew now that this decision, this refusal to be her safety net anymore, wasn't punishment. It was release. Release for me, so I could live without the constant drain. And release for her, so she could finally stand on her own 2 feet. Tomorrow, she might call 37 more times. She might send messages, letters, or relatives. She might even show up at my door. But tonight, the phone was silent, the wine glass was half full, and I was exactly where I needed to be in my own life, on my own terms. It was just after 6 in the evening, the time of day when the light turns soft and gold and the street outside feels like it's holding its breath before night. I was on the porch watering the hanging geraniums, enjoying the quiet, when I saw a familiar SUV crawling slowly down the street. It was them. Gabrielle got out first. Even from a distance, I could see her red-rimmed eyes, the way her shoulders sloped forward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Patrick came around from the driver's side, moving slower than usual, one hand pressed against his lower back in a subtle display of fragility. They didn't come with flowers or an olive branch. There was no casserole dish in hand, no peace offering. Just the air of people who'd been rehearsing their approach on the drive over. "Mom," Gabrielle called, her voice tentative, almost fragile. We just want to talk." I stayed at the top of the porch steps, my hand resting lightly on the railing. Behind me, the front door was open, but the screen was latched. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a statement. "You can say whatever you need to say from there," I replied, my voice steady. Patrick took a few steps forward, his hands slightly raised like he was trying to show he meant no harm. "Lynette, we know things have gotten tense. But this cutting us off, selling the business, it's drastic. We were hoping you'd reconsider. For the family's sake." The word family hit me like a pebble to the ribs. Small, but sharp. "Family," I repeated slowly. "That's an interesting word, Patrick. Because what we've had for years hasn't felt like family to me. It's felt like dependence." Gabrielle's face crumpled. "That's not fair. It's perfectly fair," I said, not raising my voice, but not softening it either. "Family is built on give and take. On care, respect, attention. You take, Gabrielle. You've always taken. And I've always given. That's not family, that's a dependency." Her hands flew up in a helpless gesture. "We've had hard times," I took a step down toward them. "We've all had hard times. You never once asked how I was doing unless it was to lead into a request. You didn't visit after my knee surgery. You didn't check on me last winter when I was sick. You didn't even call after that storm when I was without power for 3 days. But when you needed help, suddenly you remembered my number." Patrick cleared his throat, his voice low and smooth. "We've been busy, Lynette. You know how it is." "No," I cut him off sharply. "I know how you made it. You've been comfortable. Comfortable knowing that no matter how badly you mismanaged things, no matter how reckless you were, I'd be there to patch the hole." Gabrielle's eyes shone with fresh tears. "You're making it sound like we never cared about you." "Have you?" I asked, my gaze locked on hers. "Have you cared about me without wanting something in return? Have you ever dropped by just to share a cup of coffee? Have you remembered my birthday without me reminding you? Have you ever once asked me about my life and actually listened to the answer?" The silence that followed was long and cold. Finally, I said it, the truth I'd been circling for weeks. "You've called me Mom all your life, Gabrielle. But you haven't acted like my daughter in a long time. You've acted like my dependent. And the thing about dependents is, they stay dependent until someone stops enabling them. That stops today." Gabrielle flinched like I'd struck her. "So that's it? You're cutting us off?" "This isn't cutting you off," I said. "This is cutting the cord that's been strangling both of us. You're going to stand on your own. And I'm going to live my life without carrying the weight of yours on my back." Patrick shook his head, murmuring something under his breath. Gabrielle turned away slightly, her shoulders stiff. "I can't believe you're doing this to your own family," she said, her voice shaking. I stepped back up onto the porch. "You're not acting like family. You're acting like people who've gotten used to taking. And I'm done being the supply." They lingered for a moment, as if hoping I'd soften, open the screen door, let them in. But I stayed where I was, my hand on the railing, my body still a wall between them and my home. At last, they turned and walked back to the SUV. Patrick opened the door for Gabrielle, but she didn't look at me as she climbed in. The car pulled away slowly, and soon they were gone, the quiet of the street returning like a held breath being released. I went back inside, closed the solid front door this time, and leaned against it for a long moment. My pulse was still high, my palms damp, but underneath it all was something steady and sure. For the first time, I had said it out loud, not just in my head, not just in my private thoughts. I had told them exactly what they were to me now. Not family. And I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 weeks after that final, tense evening on my porch, I signed the last document that tied me to my business. The signature was steady, deliberate, the kind of stroke you make when you know you're closing a door and locking it for good. The business that had been my life's work, my safety net, and my shackles was now someone else's responsibility. The payment landed in my account that afternoon, and I sat in the bank parking lot for a long time just breathing. No more supplier calls at dawn. No more emergency repairs for a cafe that wasn't mine. No more bending my schedule, my finances, my life to keep someone else afloat. For the first time in decades, I wasn't tethered to anyone. I didn't stay in my old house long after that. I'd been quietly visiting listings for months, half out of daydreaming, half out of hope. There was one place I kept coming back to in my mind, a cedar-shingled cottage tucked at the edge of a small lake an hour north. Weathered but solid, with a wide wraparound porch and a view of the water that made the whole world feel softer. The first time I saw it, months earlier, I told myself it was too much, too far, too indulgent, too selfish. Now, those words felt laughable. The too much had always been the life I was living for everyone else. I bought it without hesitation. The day I moved in, the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The lake stretched out before me, glassy and still, reflecting a sky so clear it felt like the first deep breath after years of shallow ones. Inside, the rooms were small but filled with light. The kitchen had cream cabinets with worn handles, the kind that tell a story. The living room had a stone fireplace, the mantel just waiting for my mother's old clock. Upstairs, a narrow hall led to 2 bedrooms, one for me, one for guests I might actually want to host. That first morning, I made coffee and drank it on the porch while the mist lifted off the water. No phone buzzing, no one banging on the door. Just the call of a loon somewhere across the lake and the gentle lap of water against the dock. Unpacking was like shedding skin. I didn't just empty boxes, I curated my life. In the kitchen, I put my favorite china in the cabinets where I could reach it, instead of burying it in a box for special occasions that never came. In the living room, I draped my mother's quilt over the back of the sofa, where the afternoon light caught its colors. My books went into shelves that lined the walls, spines facing out like old friends waiting to be picked up again. The back garden was wild, weeds taller than my knees, hydrangeas spilling out of their beds, a lilac bush half-choked by vines. I spent hours kneeling in the dirt, trimming, digging, planting. Every weed I pulled felt like clearing a piece of my own overgrown life. By the end of the first week, there were neat rows of herbs near the kitchen door and tulip bulbs buried deep, waiting for spring. It didn't take long to meet people. On my first morning walk, I passed a hammock strung between 2 maples, occupied by a silver-haired woman with a paperback in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. "I'm Marlene," she called before I could introduce myself. "Your porch roses are going to need feeding. I'll bring you some of my fertilizer mix." That evening, she knocked on my door with a plate of still-warm blueberry muffins and a smile that could disarm anyone. She'd been a teacher for 30 years, she told me, and now spent her time reading, baking, and tending her 2 cats, one of which had already wandered into my yard like it owned the place. At the Saturday farmers market, I met Tom and Evelyn, a couple in their 70s who ran the produce stall. Evelyn leaned over the counter to tell me about the Thursday evening book club at the library. "We don't bite," she promised, "unless you pick something dreadful." I joined the book club the very next week. It was strange at first, sitting in a circle of strangers, talking about a novel simply because I wanted to, with nowhere else I had to be. No hidden agenda, no clock ticking in the back of my mind. Just conversation and laughter and the passing of lemon cookies around the table. On a whim, I signed up for pottery classes at the Community Arts Center. The first time I sat at the wheel, the clay wobbled and collapsed under my hands, but I laughed along with the others. There was something pure about creating something just because it brought me joy, no profit margin, no deadlines. My days settled into a rhythm: mornings in the garden, afternoons on the porch with a book or at the wheel shaping clay, evenings walking the lake path as the sun dipped low and turned the water to molten gold. Every now and then, I'd catch myself waiting for the phone to ring with a crisis. Old habits die hard. But more and more often, the calls were from Marlene inviting me for tea or Evelyn sharing a new soup recipe from the book club's last meeting. And when the phone stayed silent, I didn't feel dread. I felt peace. I wasn't just free of obligations. I was free to choose. Choose my friends. Choose my days. Choose my own life. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was living, really living on my own terms. The news didn't come from Gabrielle. Of course it didn't. It came on a Thursday morning over coffee at Marlene's kitchen table. She was scrolling through the local news site, the one that mixed town events with real estate listings, bake sale flyers, and the occasional bankruptcy notice. She squinted at her phone, lowering her glasses. You know a Patrick Garrison? My hand stilled halfway to my mug. Yes, I said. He's my daughter's husband. Marlene turned the screen toward me. Garrison Home Renovations files for bankruptcy after 15 years in operation. The article was brief but brutal: unpaid suppliers, debts stacking into the hundreds of thousands, and several pending lawsuits over unfinished work. They'll be okay, I'm sure, Marlene offered gently. But I could hear the unspoken part: if they have someone to bail them out. That afternoon, I called Evelyn under the pretense of confirming book club plans. Evelyn had a knack for knowing things before they became public knowledge. It's worse than the article says, she told me. Patrick's done for in that business. And Gabrielle's taken a job at the elementary school. Teacher's aide, short hours, short pay. I hear they're cutting back hard. No dinners out. No travel. Diane's been helping with groceries. I stared out at the lake from my kitchen window. The water was smooth and silver in the late afternoon light, as if the wind had decided to leave it in peace. I felt something stir inside me. Not panic, not dread, just a quiet pang. I didn't want them to lose their home. I didn't want them to feel the weight of a collapsing life. But I didn't feel responsible. And that was new. For years, I'd been the first call when trouble struck. I'd drive to their house, checkbook in my purse, a plan already forming before I even parked in their driveway. I told myself it was love. In truth, it was habit, a reflex so deeply carved into me that I barely noticed it anymore. But this time, the reflex didn't come. This time, I sat in my kitchen, hands wrapped around my tea, and thought, they will figure it out. There was, however, one loose thread left between us: the mortgage. When they bought their house years ago, I had helped with the down payment. When they'd missed payments, I had stepped in more than once to keep the bank from knocking. And last year, in one of my soft moments, I'd promised to cover the final installment, not realizing at the time how much that promise was another link in the chain between us. The payment was due in 2 weeks, and I decided, after 2 nights of turning it over in my mind, that I would pay it. Not as a rescue, not as an act of guilt, but as an ending. At the bank, the clerk recognized me from years of visits tied to business accounts and supplier payments. She smiled politely as she slid the paperwork across the counter. "This will clear the balance entirely," she said. I signed my name in smooth, deliberate strokes. When she handed me the receipt stamped "paid in full," I held it for a long moment. It was heavier than paper should be. Not because of the amount, though it was substantial, but because it represented the last financial tie I had to Gabrielle and Patrick. Years of rescues, of being the emergency fund, the backup plan, the unspoken guarantee. And just like that, it was over. I walked out of the bank into crisp autumn air, the trees along Main Street blazing with red and gold. My feet felt lighter on the pavement. Driving back to the lake house, I realized I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. I didn't need to prepare for a confrontation or defend my decision. I had done exactly what I chose to do and nothing more. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine as the sun sank behind the pines, setting the water aflame with orange light. I thought about Gabrielle. I thought about the day she'd moved into that house, beaming as she showed me each room, already planning the renovations Patrick would get to someday. I thought about the years of patching their gaps, smoothing their mistakes, catching their falls before they even hit the ground. I felt sorry for her now, but not guilty. That was the difference. The guilt had been the anchor, dragging me down into every storm they stirred up. Without it, I was afloat for the first time in decades. I knew they might struggle. I knew they might resent me for not doing more. But I also knew something they didn't yet. People learn to swim faster when there's no one holding the life raft right beside them. And as I sat there in the cooling evening air, listening to the quiet lap of water against the dock, I felt something I hadn't known in years. Ease. Deep, uncluttered, bone-deep ease. It was a soft, honey-lit afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that made the lake look like a sheet of glass under the sun. I'd spent the morning planting geraniums along the front steps, their red petals a cheerful contrast against the weathered wood, and I was just hanging my gardening gloves on the porch rail when I saw it. A single envelope, placed dead center on the porch swing. The handwriting on the front stopped me mid-step. Gabrielle. Not the tidy, composed loops she used on holiday cards and thank you notes, the kind of handwriting that was meant for public display. This was uneven, letters leaning into each other, ink darker in some places where the pen had pressed too hard. I stood there for a long moment, the envelope cool in my hand. Part of me considered leaving it there, walking back inside, and making a cup of tea before I even thought about opening it. But curiosity, and something deeper, more complicated, tugged me down onto the swing. The chain creaked softly as I sat. The lake stretched out before me, calm and still, a faint breeze carrying the scent of lilac from the bush I'd nursed back to health in the garden. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the letter inside. Mom, I've started this letter more times than I can count. Every draft ended up in the trash because I didn't know how to write it without making excuses. I've been good at excuses for a long time. I think you knew that before I did. So here's the truth. I understand now. I understand why you did what you did. Why you stopped. Why you let me stand on my own, even though it meant letting me fall. I thought you were punishing me. I told myself you were being cold, selfish. But I see now that you were forcing me to learn something I'd been avoiding for most of my adult life, that I'd been living on your back instead of my own 2 feet. Patrick and I are divorced. It wasn't just the bankruptcy, though that was the earthquake that shook everything loose. It was the way we leaned on you more than we leaned on each other. We didn't know how to stand together because we'd always had you holding us up. I have a job now, a real one, full-time at the elementary school. It doesn't pay much, but every paycheck feels like a small miracle because it's mine. I pay my bills. I buy my own groceries. I fixed a leaky sink last month with a wrench and a YouTube video. You would have laughed if you'd seen me swearing at the pipes. I used to resent you for cutting me off. Now I'm grateful. You forced me to build a life, Mom. I didn't think I could, but I did. And it's not big or fancy, but it's mine. All mine. I'm sorry it took losing so much to see what you were trying to give me. I'm sorry for the way I treated you on Mother's Day and every other day I made you feel small or invisible. You deserved better from me. You always did. If you're willing, I'd like to see you. No requests. No hidden reasons. Just coffee. Like we used to before everything got tangled. Love. Gabrielle, by the time I reached the last line, the word swam. I blinked hard, brushing the back of my hand across my eyes. I thought of the young woman she had been, headstrong, impatient, brimming with plans she never carried through because she knew I'd catch her if she stumbled. I thought of the Mother's Day that started this unraveling, the pink costume ring still sitting in the drawer where I'd tossed it. She was different now. I could hear it in the way she wrote about her life, no longer as if it was something happening to her, but something she was building with her own hands. And yet, I didn't reach for a pen. I didn't rush to call her. It wasn't out of anger. It wasn't punishment. It was timing. I knew she was just beginning this new chapter of her life, and I was still writing mine. Some bridges shouldn't be crossed in the same day they're rebuilt. Sometimes you have to let them stand in the sun a while, let the new board settle. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it between the pages of the novel I'd been reading, marking a chapter one wasn't ready to finish yet. The porch swing rocked gently under me, the lake shimmering in the distance, lilac scent curling through the air. For the first time in decades, my life felt entirely my own, quiet, steady, unclaimed by anyone else's emergencies. And for now, that was enough. More than enough. I still don't know exactly how my daughter lost her way. It's a question I've turned over in my mind so many nights that it feels worn smooth. I raised Gabrielle with the same values my parents had drilled into me: work hard, stand on your own 2 feet, pay your debts, keep your word. She had a good home, food on the table, clothes on her back, and the knowledge that she was loved. She was bright, capable, determined, or at least she used to be. Somewhere along the way, she stopped standing on her own. Was it my fault? Had I made it too easy to lean on me? I'd always been the fixer, the one who couldn't bear to watch her struggle. Maybe that constant cushioning had trained her to believe there would always be a net, no matter how recklessly she jumped. Or was it Patrick? With his endless, big ideas that never came to fruition, and the way he smoothed over each failure with a new promise, one I often ended up paying for. Maybe she had learned from him that responsibility could be postponed if you could charm someone into covering the gap. I will never have the complete answer. And maybe that's something I'll have to live with. After her letter, we didn't rush into anything. There were a few short notes back and forth, polite, cautious. On my birthday, she sent a simple "thinking of you" card, and I sent back a thank you. We were circling each other slowly, as if both of us knew that if we moved too quickly, the old patterns might snap back into place. Then, one Saturday morning in late July, Marlene spotted her at the farmer's market. She looked good, Marlene told me later, setting a bag of peaches on my counter. Healthier. And she wasn't alone. 2 weeks later, Gabrielle called. "I'd like you to meet someone," she said. "His name's Daniel. We can come by if you're free." I said yes, though my stomach was tight with the memory of Patrick's early charm and how easily it had worn thin. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The sun was bright, the air warm but not stifling, and the lake shimmered like a sheet of silver in the distance. When Gabrielle stepped out of the car, I noticed it immediately. She looked settled. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her clothes modest and well-kept. There was no frantic energy, no strained smile. "This is Daniel," she said simply, with no embellishment. Daniel shook my hand firmly. He was in his mid-40s, with the kind of presence that was calm rather than loud. He met my eyes when he spoke, and when Gabrielle talked, he listened without interrupting, not just the polite nodding I'd seen from Patrick, but actual attention. Over iced tea on the porch, I learned he was a project manager for a construction firm in a neighboring town. Divorced. One son in college. He'd built his career steadily, without get-rich-quick schemes, without chasing trends. As the weeks passed, I saw subtle but undeniable changes in Gabrielle. She'd taken more hours at the school and was studying for a teaching certification. She spoke about saving money and keeping a budget, and when she said she had a small emergency fund, I nearly dropped my teacup. She seemed to take pride in telling me she'd cooked dinner every night for a month and that she'd handled a flat tire all by herself. Daniel, I realized, wasn't pushing her with criticism. He was pushing her with accountability. When she mentioned wanting something, he asked her how she'd plan for it. When she complained about a coworker, he asked how she'd address it directly. He didn't let her drift into excuses, but he also didn't swoop in to fix everything for her. It was strange to watch. Strange because I had tried for years to give her those same nudges, but with me, she'd resisted, pushed back, argued, rolled her eyes. With him, she leaned in and listened. One evening, the three of us sat on the porch as the sun burned low over the water, streaking the lake with ribbons of gold and pink. "You know," Gabrielle said quietly, her fingers wrapped around her glass, "Daniel isn't doing anything you didn't try to do for me. I just wasn't ready to hear it from you." I didn't say anything right away. I could have reminded her how many sleepless nights I'd spent trying to be the voice she needed. I could have said that it hurt, still hurt, that she could hear it from a man she'd known a year but not from me. But I didn't. I just nodded and let the sound of the water fill the silence. After they left, I sat alone in the fading light. I still didn't have the full story of how she'd lost her way, and maybe I never would. But I could see that she was moving forward now, not because I was pulling her, but because she was steering herself, with someone at her side who wouldn't take the wheel away from her. For the first time in a long while, I believed she might keep going. And I felt the rare, unfamiliar relief of knowing I didn't have to guide her anymore.